A widowed black mom with twins was left with $20 inheritance from her husband. The next day, the lawyer drove her to a hidden estate. Evelyn Johnson sat at the far end of the long polished table in the conference room at Bell & Company Advocates' offices, her 6-year-old twins tucked close on either side. Naomi's legs swung nervously. Nathan's small hand clung to the sleeve of his mother's dress. Evelyn smoothed their hair, the gesture steady even as her heart thudded against her ribs. She had not slept. Grief hung behind her eyes, hot and gritty, a fever she could not shake. But she had dressed carefully, pressed the black dress, polished her shoes, braided Naomi's curls. She would be neat. She would be dignified. She would not give them a reason to call her lesser. Across from her, the Westmore family gathered like a conclave. Eleanor Westmore, the matriarch, wore pearls the size of marbles and a smile too sharp to be mistaken for kindness. Beside her lounged Edward Westmore, Thomas's younger brother, twirling a gold pen between his fingers as though this were entertainment. A few cousins, 2 aunts, a pair of glossy-haired spouses, people who had never so much as called to ask about the twins, filled the remaining chairs, each expression perfectly arranged into solemn concern that simmered with curiosity. At the near head of the table sat Marcus Bell, the family's attorney, clearing his throat and stacking papers until the pile aligned at immaculate right angles. "Thank you for coming," Marcus said, voice smooth and professional. "We are here to read the last will and testament of Mr. Thomas Westmore. Before we begin, a reminder. Please, no recording devices, and let us keep the proceedings civil." Civil. Evelyn almost laughed. Civil was a word gilded over a blade. She pulled her children closer. "It will be all right," she whispered, more prayer than promise. Naomi peered up at her. "Will we go home soon, Mommy?" "Soon," Evelyn murmured. "Soon." Marcus adjusted his glasses and began to read. The legal language landed like soft hammers. "I, Thomas Westmore, being of sound mind and body." The enumeration of assets, the description of accounts, properties, trusts, a scroll of numbers that meant nothing and everything. Evelyn tried to follow, to snatch meaning from the tide of words. Commercial holdings, a townhouse, a lake cabin, several investment accounts, the family businesses. Each item felt like a door she had never been allowed to open. Eleanor's fingers tapped a slow, satisfied rhythm on the table. "Hey, my beautiful friends. Hope you are doing well today. Drop a comment and let me know how you are feeling and where you are watching from. Let me know how you are feeling about this story so far. Please don't forget to hit that subscribe button because the tension is only just starting to build, and trust me, you are going to want to know how this goes." "And to his mother, Eleanor Westmore," Marcus read, "the art collection and the lakeside property are bequeathed." Eleanor gave a small, triumphant nod, as if this were merely the natural arrangement of the universe returning to order. Evelyn's throat tightened. "Where are we? Where are Naomi and Nathan?" "To his brother, Edward Westmore, controlling interest in Westmore and Sons Logistics and the Midtown offices." Edward showed his teeth. "Thomas always said I had a head for business." A ripple of muted laughter traveled the table, quickly stifled. Marcus coughed. His gaze flicked toward Evelyn. Too fast to be noticed by anyone not looking for kindness, and then back to the papers. "And to his wife, Evelyn Johnson Westmore." The room inhaled. Evelyn's hand tightened on Nathan's. Marcus paused. A heartbeat, then 2. He swallowed. The sum of $20. Silence fell so complete the crystal pendants of the chandelier seemed to strain to hear the aftermath. Then a strangled sound, part laugh, part gasp, broke from one of the cousins. Eleanor's mouth stretched into what might have been called a smile by someone who did not know the species. $20, she repeated, savoring the syllables as if tasting a rare wine. "Well, some things are best kept symbolic." Edward leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes bright with cruel delight. A generous parting gift for services rendered. Heat flashed in Evelyn's face, then drained so quickly she felt faint. For an absurd instant she imagined she had misheard. The numbers had been so large moments ago. They had been handing out houses like party favors. How could the arithmetic of their love, 20 years of building a life, of twin birth nights, of shared breakfasts, of laughter pressed into a pillow, be calculated as $20? Nathan's voice came small and too clear in the hush. "Mommy, why are they laughing at us?" Evelyn's mouth opened, but language refused her. She pressed a kiss into his hair, a more honest answer than any sentence she could shape. Marcus shifted in his chair. "We will proceed," he said quickly, as if the act of moving forward might erase what had been done. He finished the formalities, his voice a metronome over a heartbeat gone deaf. When he said, "This concludes the reading," the room exhaled. A small envelope slid down the table toward Evelyn. Receipts, an accounting, and a crisp green bill. A 20, clean and crackling, placed face up like a trophy. Eleanor stood. "My condolences," she said, making the word a dagger. Thomas corrected his mistake before the end. "It is best you accept it with grace." Evelyn found her voice, scraping it from somewhere behind her ribs. "Thomas loved me." "Love," Eleanor said evenly, "is different from judgment. He remembered his place. And yours." Edward rose with an easy athletic grace, tucking his pen into his pocket. "Practical advice, Evelyn," he said, as if he were offering her a recipe. "Hand over any keys you might still have, return the company car. Oh, that was already reclaimed, yes? And do not embarrass yourself by trying to contest. The courts have a way of sorting wheat from chaff. You will not enjoy the threshing." "Leave," Evelyn whispered. "Please." Eleanor tilted her head, feigning surprise at the discourtesy. "One more thing," she added gently as if concerned. "Children thrive in stable homes. If you discover you cannot provide, do think of what is best for them." "We do." The floor shifted. Evelyn's hand went cold around Naomi's fingers. Across the table, Marcus's jaw clenched. He looked as if he might speak and then did not. He stacked the papers again, aligning corners no one would notice, the small, fussy movement of a man who needed to control something he could not control. Chairs scraped. A perfume cloud drifted as the Westmores filed out, stopping only to offer Evelyn counterfeit condolences or flat stares. Cousins whispered in the corridor. Someone's laughter, quickly shushed, echoed off the marble. The door clicked shut. Silence returned, thick and suffocating. Evelyn sat very still. She lifted the $20 bill with hands that would not stop trembling and folded it once, twice, 3 times with careful, precise motions, as though neatness might turn insult into blessing. Naomi, sensing the fragility of the moment, pressed her cheek to her mother's arm. Nathan watched the bill disappear into Evelyn's purse with solemn eyes, as if he had witnessed a burial. "I am so sorry," Marcus said quietly. She looked up. His face had rearranged itself. The professional mask had slipped, and in its place was something old-fashioned and human, shame. "You read it," she said. The words came out flat, not accusatory, simply true. "I did." Marcus swallowed. "It is my job to read what is filed." "And do you believe it?" Evelyn asked. Her voice held. He closed his eyes for the length of a breath. "I believe," he said carefully, "that not every truth is in the document that gets filed." A pause. "Mrs. Johnson, Evelyn, if you need help with logistics, I can have an assistant call a car." "No," she said, rising, gathering her children. "We will walk." He nodded, stricken, and pulled the door open for her. In the corridor, the Westmore's perfume lingered like a ghost. The receptionist lowered her gaze as Evelyn passed, as if shame were contagious. Outside, cold air burned Evelyn's lungs. The stone steps seemed steeper than when she had climbed them earlier with hope lodged in her throat. She descended slowly, careful, each footfall deliberate, a choreography of endurance. The twins clung to her hands, 2 small anchors keeping her from floating off the earth. On the sidewalk, a gust of wind lifted a corner of her scarf. She tucked it back and straightened. The city moved around them, buses snorted, a cyclist threaded traffic, somebody laughed into a phone, and the casual normalness of it bit harder than cruelty. How could the world continue when hers had cracked? At the bottom of the steps, she paused to steady herself. "We are going home," she told the twins. Saying it made the sentence feel possible. Naomi peered up. "Do we still have a home?" "Yes," Evelyn said. It was not bravado. It was a mother's decision to make a sentence true. They had nearly reached the corner when a voice stopped them. "Mrs. Johnson." Marcus again, breath fogging in the cold, a coat thrown on hastily over his suit. He looked over his shoulder as though someone might be watching. Evelyn turned, spine stiffening without her permission. "What?" He glanced down at the twins. His face softened. "I wanted to say, if anything is unclear in the documents, call my office. I can explain the processes." "Are there processes that turn $20 into 20 years? Evelyn asked quietly. Marcus flinched as if struck. "No," he said. Then, in a voice even softer, "Not the processes I am supposed to speak about here." A car horn blared. A taxi edged by the curb. Somewhere across the street, a woman shouted a name, and a dog came skittering out of a shop doorway. Life relentless, indifferent. "Good afternoon," Marcus managed, and he stepped back, retreating up the steps, his shoes making no sound on the thick carpet as the law office swallowed him again. Evelyn stood very still until the door closed. Then she bent low, met each of her children's eyes in turn, and tried to pour strength through the look alone. "We are going home," she repeated, calmer now. "We will have tea. We will be together." They walked. The wind worried at her coat, tears pricked her eyes. She blinked them away and kept moving. At the next corner, Naomi lifted her face to the sun, small and brave. Nathan began to hum the tune from a cartoon, the thin melody threading through the day like a string pulling them forward. When they reached the bus stop, Evelyn sat, purse in her lap, $20 bill nested inside like a small, taunting jewel. She pressed her palm over it. It was only paper. It carried no prophecy. It carried no verdict she would accept. A bus roared up, sighing the way heavy machines do when they kneel to let you in. She stepped aboard with her children and found a seat near the back. Through the scratched window, the law office shrank as the bus pulled away, the polished stone retreating into the city's geometry until it was just another block in a world of blocks. Evelyn let her head rest against the glass. Reflections slid over her face. A row of trees, a line of laundry, a woman pushing a stroller, a pair of teenagers arguing about nothing, a man dozing with his mouth open. Ordinary life, astonishing in its indifference, threaded around her own extraordinary humiliation until the two tangled, and she felt, unexpectedly, not erased but hidden, like a seed. She did not know what would grow. She did not know that before the week was out, a knock at her door would deliver something Thomas had left for her. A map, a letter, a key to a place where her name was written in ink that did not smear. For now, she held the hands of her children. For now, she pressed her lips to their hair and breathed them in as if love itself could be stored the way money could not. The bus turned toward their neighborhood, the sun falling behind low buildings, the afternoon ripening into a thin winter gold. "My friend, if you were in Evelyn's seat, riding away with $20 and 2 children, what would you do next? Tell me where you are watching from and what your heart says." The bus dropped them a few blocks from the apartment, where the sidewalks were cracked and the paint peeled in long curls from old porches. Naomi's hand was sticky in Evelyn's palm. Nathan's steps dragged. The afternoon had thinned into a faint winter light, the kind that made everything look a little more tired than it already was. Inside, the apartment smelled faintly of dish soap and the lavender detergent Evelyn used to pretend the air was softer than it was. The radiator hissed and knocked. She hung their coats on the single hook by the door and led the twins to the small table. "Wash up," she said, because routine was a kind of mercy, and children recognized mercies even when they were small. She stood a moment in the kitchen and let her forehead rest against the cupboard. On the counter lay a stack of unopened envelopes, final notice, past due, urgent, each one a small drumbeat of dread. She pushed them aside, reached for the bread, and cut 3 thin slices. The heel became toast, butter scraped to the very edges with the kind of carefulness that comes from counting coins. She poured 2 glasses of milk and a small one for herself. The $20 bill was still folded in her purse like a splinter. "Mommy," Naomi asked, swinging her feet, "are we still rich because Daddy was?" Evelyn sat, the toast warm in her hands. "We are rich in what matters," she said, and heard how much like a sermon it sounded. She tried again, gentler. "We have each other. That is our treasure." Nathan frowned. "But Grandma said we were nothing." "Grandma doesn't know our hearts," Evelyn said. "And she doesn't know the future." The sentence steadied her as she spoke it. After they ate, she ran a bath and washed their hair, careful hands working through curls. Naomi hummed. Nathan poured water into a plastic cup and watched it spill back with scientific absorption. When she tucked them in, the night light made small constellations on the ceiling. Naomi clutched the stuffed rabbit Thomas had bought at a street fair. One ear was matted from 100 nights of comfort. "Tell me a happy memory," Naomi said, as she often did. "From when Daddy was here." Evelyn smoothed the blanket. "A happy memory," she repeated, tasting the words. It had rained the day she met Thomas. Not a storm, just a steady, silver drizzle that softened everything. She was leaving the diner after a double shift, her palms raw from the bleach bucket, when a scarf slipped from her bag. A man in a suit bent to pick it up, shook off the drops, and held it out with careful fingers. "You dropped this," he said, and his voice had warmth in it, not the sharpness she'd learned to expect from men in suits. They spoke in the shadow of the awning, and she noticed the way he listened. Eyes focused, face open, as if each word mattered. Weeks later, he introduced her to his mother over dinner in a room that smelled like lemon polish and old money. Eleanor lifted a glass, smiled without softness, and asked Evelyn if she had ever considered finishing school. The way one might ask if a stray had considered a bath. Thomas squeezed Evelyn's knee under the table and said lightly, "Mother, she reads more than I do." At their wedding, Eleanor wore frost the way other women wore lace. She did not look at Evelyn when she said congratulations. But when the twins were born, long night, tangled hours, the bright animal cry, Thomas stood with tears in his eyes and whispered, "Look what your courage made," as though the room itself had bent around their love. Evelyn's voice grew quiet as she finished the memory. The twins' breathing slowed. She kissed their foreheads, one and then the other, and stood in the doorway, reluctant to leave the small piece of their sleep. In the kitchen, she washed dishes she could not remember dirtying. The tap squeaked. Water ran hot over her hands until they stung. When she switched it off, the silence came back so loud it felt like pressure on her ears. She sat at the table and pulled the stack of envelopes close. One by one she opened them. Past due. Final notice. An insurance statement in language that made her teeth clench. A letter from the landlord, formal and clipped. If payment is not received by the 1st of the month, we will proceed with eviction. Her name, Evelyn Johnson Westmore, looked fragile on paper, too thin to hold a life. Grief came sudden and sharp. She covered her face with her hands, elbows on the table, and let the tears slide through her fingers. They came from an old well that never seemed to run dry. They came from the lawyer's flat voice and Eleanor's smile and the $20 bill burning a rectangle in her purse. She pressed her palms to her eyes until darkness bloomed red. A soft scuff in the hallway made her lift her head. Nathan stood there in pajama feet, hair sticking up, the solemnness of small boys who have seen too much. "Mommy," he whispered, "are we going to be okay?" Evelyn wiped her cheeks with the heel of her hand and opened her arms. He climbed into her lap, all knees and trust. "We are," she said, and this time the sentence felt less like a performance and more like a vow. "We will be okay because I will not stop finding a way." He nodded, satisfied with the math of love. "Okay," he echoed and padded back to bed. When the apartment was quiet again, Evelyn stood and moved through the rooms, setting small things right. A shoe by the door, a dish towel folded, a light switched off. This was what she could control. She returned to the table and laid her purse beside the letters. The zipper rasped. The 20 lay there, neat from its careful folds. She smoothed it flat with her palm and on a sudden impulse, slid it between the pages of the family Bible on the shelf. Tucked under Psalm 23, a note of survival. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." She closed the cover gently, as if not to wake a sleeping thing. The clock clicked toward midnight. The radiator shuddered and settled. Outside, a siren wailed and faded. Evelyn rested her forehead against the cool glass of the window and watched the breath fog and clear. She thought of Thomas, his laugh, the weight of his hand on her back in a crowded room, the way he'd say, "Ignore them. I chose you." She thought of Eleanor's parting shot about what is best for children, as if love were a ledger. A knock sounded at the door. It was late enough that fear went through her like a wire. She froze, listening. Another knock, not harsh, not angry. A measured urgency, 2 beats, then 1. She crossed to the peephole and held her breath. Marcus Bell stood in the dim hallway, his tie loosened, an overcoat thrown on as if he'd left in a hurry. He glanced over his shoulder, then faced the door again. When he spoke, his voice was low enough that it barely reached. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, and the Mrs. sounded like respect, not formality. "Please. I need a word. It concerns Thomas." Every part of her wanted to pretend she wasn't home. Every part of her wanted an answer. She slid the chain off the latch, turned the deadbolt, and opened the door the width of one careful life. "What could there possibly be left to say?" she asked, not cruelly, just tired. Marcus swallowed. In the hallway's weak light his face looked older, the kind of tired men get when they've stood too long where they shouldn't. "Not everything was said in that room," he answered. "May I come in for a moment?" Evelyn held the door, weighing danger against the tremor in his voice. Behind her, the apartment breathed softly. In her chest, something shifted. Fear's hold loosening just enough to let a sliver of possibility through. 2 minutes, she said. He nodded, grateful, and stepped inside. The corridor light blinked like a tired eye when Evelyn unlatched the chain and opened the door the width of her palm. Marcus Bell stood in the dim hall with his coat thrown over a rumpled suit, hair damp from a mist that hadn't decided to be rain. His hat hung from one hand, as if he were entering a chapel, and not a walk-up apartment where the radiator hissed and a mother hid her fear with tidiness. What could there possibly be left to say? Evelyn asked. It was not bitterness. It was exhaustion given voice. Marcus glanced over his shoulder, then back at her. Not everything you heard in that room was the whole truth, he said. Not everything filed is all that exists. Please, 2 minutes. She studied his face. The polite mask from the will reading had slipped. Behind it, shame made him older. She slid the chain free and stepped aside. He came in on soft feet, careful not to bring the hallways cold with him. He did not sit. He held himself like a man preparing to confess. I read the will because it was placed before me, he said, words measured, the way careful men walk on ice. But Thomas prepared for what happened today. Her husband's name in another man's mouth opened something tender and dangerous in her chest. Prepared how? Marcus reached into his overcoat and drew out a large brown envelope, thick and sealed with red wax. Across the front, in the firm slanted hand she knew from grocery lists and love notes. To Evelyn, on the event of my death. The sight of those letters made the room lurch, as if the floor had remembered it was a boat. Evelyn did not take it at once. Her fingers hovered over the paper the way a cautious swimmer tests cold water. Why didn't you give me this today in there? Because I was told not to, he said simply. Because Eleanor and Edward were explicit about consequences. My license. My livelihood. My family. I am ashamed I did not disobey them. The envelope rested on his open palm like a confession. Evelyn slid it toward herself, feeling its weight. Somewhere down the hall, a bed spring sighed as one of the twins turned in sleep. Do they know this exists? She asked. I doubt it, Marcus said. But they suspect I hesitated. Edward watches too closely for a man with nothing to hide. He lowered his voice. Open it, but not here, not tonight. Go somewhere quiet. Away from eyes. How long have you had it? Since the week Thomas first went into hospital. He swallowed. He made me swear I would deliver it to you, and to you alone. He anticipated the shape of his family's cruelty. He anticipated the manner of it. The envelope warmed against Evelyn's skin, as if the paper held a small human heat. She imagined Thomas sealing it, thumb pressed to the cooling wax. She imagined him choosing words the way he chose tools, carefully for use. You risk a great deal to bring this, she said. There is a difference between being a lawyer and being a man, Marcus answered. Tonight I remembered which one my children will ask about when they learn their father's name. Silence moved through the room like a tide. The refrigerator hummed its small mechanical hymn. Evelyn slid the envelope into her tote and drew the zipper slowly, the sound like a needle closing a wound. Tomorrow, at first light, Marcus said. Pack light. Take only what matters. If anyone knocks, neighbors, officials, cousins you barely remember, tell them nothing. Call me while they stand on the porch. Why would cousins appear? Because when wolves smell hope on the air, they dress themselves like shepherds. He put on his hat and crossed to the door. Evelyn. He hesitated, and in the pause she saw the distance between the man who had read the will and the one who stood here now. I am sorry for the way I was today. It will not happen again. She nodded, unable to trust her voice. He slipped out. The lock clicked into place with a sound like an oath. Evelyn stood a long moment in the small kitchen and let the stillness settle. The apartment wore its night. 2 bowls drying on a towel, a school notice magnet to the fridge, the twins' shoes aligned by the door as if the day had ended obediently. She set the envelope on the table and sat before it. Her thumbs traced the wax. She had the sudden childish urge to hold it to her ear and listen for a heartbeat. Thomas, she whispered to the paper, surprising herself. What did you leave me? From the hallway, Naomi's voice floated, sleep thick and tender. Mommy. Evelyn rose and went to them. She pulled blankets to chins, smoothed curls from warm foreheads, breathed in the scent of soap and childhood. Go back to sleep, she murmured. We have an early morning. Naomi's hand found her mother's and squeezed once, trusting without knowing the reason. Back at the table, Evelyn set water to boil and watched the kettle just shy of singing. Steam ghosted the window. She cupped the envelope again. Open now and risk whatever eyes Eleanor had stationed in the shadows? Wait and let dawn hold the first light on words Thomas had intended for her alone? She slipped the envelope into the family Bible on the shelf, between the thin pages of Psalm 23 and a pressed clover Naomi had tucked there last spring. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." The old words steadied her hands. She gathered a small stack of clothes for the twins, rolled them tight, and set them by the door with coats and boots aligned like soldiers who would not fail at dawn. She wrote a note to the landlord, brief, courteous, about picking up boxes next week. She laid the overdue notices in a neat pile and set her keys on top, as if order could keep panic from reproducing in the night. Then she turned out the kitchen light and stood in the doorway a moment longer, eyes adjusting to the half-dark, listening to the apartment breathe. "Tomorrow," she said to the low hum and the sleeping house. "Tomorrow I will know." She carried the tote to the bedroom and set it against the wall where she could touch it from the edge of the bed. When she lay down, she faced the shadows and let her palm rest on the shape of the letter through canvas. Sleep did not come so much as a drifting, a small boat moving in circles at anchor while dawn rode toward her from a long way off. When the alarm rang, quiet, insistent, Evelyn was already awake. She rose into the gray that follows night and precedes choice, and for the first time since the will reading, the day felt like something she could meet instead of survive. Before the alarm could claim the morning, Evelyn was sitting at the kitchen table with a sweater pulled over her nightgown, hands wrapped around a mug that steamed like a small prayer. The apartment's quiet felt different at this hour, less like emptiness, more like a held breath. Beyond the window, the sky was a pale seam ripping open the dark. She brought the Bible from the shelf and laid it on the table as gently as one sets down a sleeping child. The pressed clover slipped from the pages and skated across the wood. She smoothed it back into Psalm 23, then lifted the brown envelope free. For a moment she only traced the wax with her thumb, feeling the ridge where it had cooled under Thomas's hand. She remembered the way he sealed letters, self-conscious about being old-fashioned, and doing it anyway. "If I cannot be grand," he used to joke, "I can at least be deliberate." She slid a butter knife under the edge and broke the seal. The paper gave with a quiet sigh, as if relieved to finally do what it had been made for. Inside lay a folded letter, 2 stiff documents with embossed seals, a smaller envelope, and a thin, blue-backed passbook. Evelyn unfolded the letter first. Thomas's handwriting lifted off the page, as if he were speaking from the other room. "My dearest Evelyn, if these words reach you, I have left you in a way I promised I never would. Forgive me. I know exactly how my family will behave, because they did not keep their plans a secret from me while I was still of some use to them. I could not stop them from staging their cruelty, but I could place you beyond its reach. There is a house. Not a monument, not a trophy, just a place with good bones and honest rooms. You once told me your favorite sound is a screen door in summer. This house has one that will make you believe in July again. I purchased it in your name. The deed is enclosed. There are also accounts in your name. Small streams, not a river, but enough that you will not be made to beg for what is already yours in dignity. I have left a map. Go there with the children as soon as you can do so safely. Learn the rooms, open the windows, let the walls learn your laughter. There are notes in the study. There are receipts and things Eleanor would pretend not to recognize if shown to her in daylight. Use them only if you must. Above all, guard our children. If they reach for your hand in fear, give them your whole arm. You are stronger than you believe. That sentence is the truest thing I have ever written. Always your husband, Thomas." The letter blurred. Evelyn pressed it to her lips and shut her eyes. Grief rose like a wave, and under it, something steadier, like bedrock she had not felt in weeks. He had loved her precisely. Not with speeches, but with arrangements. She unfolded the documents next. The first was a deed. Evelyn Johnson Westmore, inked in a careful hand, the notary's seal as round and certain as a full moon. The second was a signed addendum, language dense and legal, declaring certain properties and accounts set apart under her sole authority. The passbook, when she opened it, whispered a number that made her inhale. Not rich, no, but safe in a way that could be stretched with care and good bread. The map on thick paper showed a drive that needled out of the city, bent beside a river, and turned under a line of inked trees into a lane marked with a small X. Someone, Thomas, had drawn a house there with a confident square and a roof like a hat. She laid the map flat, weighing the corners with salt and sugar. A smile, small and unbelieving, tugged at her mouth. "You planned," she whispered. "Of course you did." The kettle clicked off. She did not remember turning it on. She poured water over a tea bag and watched the color climb, amber curling through clear. When she drank, she tasted steadiness, like a spoonful of something warm after a day of cold errands. In the children's room, Naomi stirred. Evelyn tucked the letter back into its envelope and slipped the documents into a plain manila folder. She dressed quickly, jeans, sweater, boots, and laid out outfits for the twins. When they woke, blinking and rosy, she pulled them into her arms and spoke into their hair. "We are taking a trip today," she said. "Daddy wanted us to see a place he made just for us." Naomi's eyes widened. "Is it far?" "A little," Evelyn said. "We will count horses and barns on the way." Nathan grinned, all small teeth and faith. "Will there be trees?" "Many," she promised. She packed lightly. 2 changes of clothes each, toothbrushes, the stuffed rabbit, the folder tucked flat against her ribs beneath her coat. She left a note for the landlord with a date to collect boxes. She gathered the stack of bill notices and slid them into a drawer so they would not yell at her when she returned. She stood a moment at the door, looking back at the rooms that had held their tired days without complaint. On the landing, she dialed Marcus. He picked up on the first ring. "I opened it," she said. "There is a house." "I'm relieved to hear your voice," he answered. "Leave now. Take as few things as possible. I'll trail at a distance until you reach the highway. If you get a call from anyone offering help, Clara, a cousin, an official, answer politely and commit to nothing. Wolves wear shepherd's coats when it rains." "She came yesterday," Evelyn said. "Clara. Cookies and a bridge partner who is a judge. Then she has already reported that she saw you." "Good. Let her think the rest is routine." Evelyn ended the call, lifted the tote, and took each child's hand. "Adventure team," she said, and Naomi saluted with the rabbit. The taxi driver glanced at them in the mirror and said nothing beyond the address. That silence felt like kindness. The city thinned into warehouses, then fields, then the long, contemplative middle where telephone poles count the miles better than clocks do. Naomi called out horses. Nathan fell asleep with his face pressed to the glass, breath clouding a circle. Evelyn kept the map open on her lap, finger ticking off landmarks as they appeared. When the weathered sign slid by, the one Thomas had drawn as a small rectangle with a nicked corner, she tapped the driver's shoulder. "Here, please." They turned under a vault of oaks. Light broke into coins on the windshield. At the end of the lane, the house stood as if it had been waiting politely for them to arrive. Stone and ivy, a deep porch, windows like watchful eyes. A screen door that looked capable of singing in July. Evelyn paid the driver, tip more generous than wisdom allowed, and stood with her children at the foot of the steps. "Is it ours?" Nathan breathed. "It is," she said, saying it made it so. They climbed together. The key from the smaller envelope fit the lock with the satisfaction of a last puzzle piece. Inside, dust lay gentle on the floors. Sunlight spilled across a long hallway. In the study, the air smelled faintly of leather and cedar. A photograph of Thomas, placed on the mantel with intention, caught the light. Evelyn's knees went soft. She set her fingers on the frame, then on the hearth, then on the back of the chair where he must have sat imagining this very moment. "We made it," she whispered. "I will keep what you kept for us." The children's laughter ran through the rooms, mapping them in joy. Evelyn opened windows, curtains breathed, stale air surrendered. She propped the front door and stood on the porch, letting the view press itself into her like a promise. The fear that had lived between her ribs for weeks loosened, as if someone had untied a stubborn knot. Back inside, she placed the folder in the desk drawer and slid the key onto a ribbon she tied around her wrist. She would be careless with nothing that mattered. My dear friends, can you feel that first true exhale? The one that comes when safety is not imagined but reachable? Would you run the halls or sit at the threshold and let the house introduce itself? Tell me in the comments. By the second morning, word had walked faster than Evelyn's courage. In the village shop, two women stopped discussing whether the instant she reached for eggs. At the bakery, the young clerk who used to chatter about school wrapped her loaf too quickly, eyes sliding away as if shame could rub off. Outside the church, a cluster of parishioners parted like a curtain, leaving just enough space for a woman with 2 children and a reputation she had not asked for. Such a tragedy, someone said in a voice that wanted to be overheard. And then that business with the will. Poor things. Evelyn kept her chin level and thanked the lady who handed Naomi a peppermint. She felt the twins press closer, children sensitive to pressure you cannot see. "Mommy," Naomi whispered as they crossed the green, "why is everyone looking at us like that?" "Because people love stories more than facts," Evelyn answered, and she felt brave for saying it. Back at the house, frost still winked in the shadows. A woman stood at the gate, cardigan neat, hair pinned the way tidy people pin their days. She offered a smile that had practiced sympathy. "Evelyn? I'm Clara," she said. "We met ages ago at a Christmas thing, very briefly. I'm related to Thomas on his father's side by marriage." Evelyn looked for the memory and found only the outline of winter. "Hello," she said, polite on reflex. Clara's eyes flicked over the house with admiration that didn't quite reach warmth. What a lovely place. Thomas had such taste. She lowered her voice. "I heard what Eleanor did. Dreadful. I told my husband at the time she'd let pride eat her alive." Evelyn waited. "I came to see if you needed anything," Clara continued, undeterred by silence. "Childcare while you settle things. A ride into town. Advice. I play bridge with a magistrate's sister. We all volunteer at the same charity shop." She smiled a little too brightly. Sometimes a friendly nudge can smooth a path. "Thank you," Evelyn said evenly. "We're settling in." Clara crouched to Naomi and Nathan's height. "Aren't you darlings?" she crooned. "What big eyes." Naomi covered her stuffed rabbit's face with both hands. Nathan edged behind his mother's leg. Clara rose with a tinkling laugh meant to take no offense. "I'll come by in a day or two," she promised. Family should look after family when the matriarch forgets how. She squeezed Evelyn's forearm, light proprietary, and left, heels clicking an exit. When the lane bent out of sight, Clara took out her phone. "She's moved in. Children with her. Looks like documents in a folder," she typed. A reply arrived before she put the phone away. "Find out her plans. Be subtle." All afternoon, Evelyn worked to give the house her breath. She opened windows, curtains learned to move again. The twins chased dust motes like fireflies out of season. In the study, she wiped the desk and slid the folder into the top drawer. The deed, the addendum, the passbook, then tested the lock twice. She tied the small key to a ribbon and slipped it over her head, the metal warm against her skin as if it belonged there. When she fetched milk at the shop, the butcher's greeting came with a question mark. "Evening, Mrs. Westmore?" He hesitated on the name. "Everything all right up at the old place?" "Everything that matters," she said, and bought more than she intended, as if dignity could be printed on receipts. At dusk, a car idled at the end of the lane, headlights doused but engine low and patient. Evelyn stood behind the curtains, unsure whether to be afraid or bored. After a minute, the car rolled on. She watched until the red taillights stitched themselves back into the main road. A soft thud interrupted the quiet. She opened the door to find an envelope sitting on the stoop like an obedient pet. The scent of powder rose from it as if Eleanor herself had exhaled. Inside, a single page in the kind of thin, expensive paper that makes cruelty sound official. "Mrs. Johnson Westmore, we understand you have taken up residence in the countryside. The arrangement is unsuitable for children given your current emotional state and financial limitations. If you attempt to claim properties or funds for which you are unprepared to provide stewardship, we will have no choice but to petition for custody in the children's best interest. Consider their welfare above your pride. Eleanor Westmore." The words did not shake. Evelyn's hands did. Heat rose behind her eyes. Not only fear but a fury that felt clean. She laid the letter flat on the desk, smoothed it with her palm, then called Marcus. "She threatened custody," Evelyn said without preamble. "She thinks to frighten me into leaving the house." "She wants you panicked," Marcus answered, voice low as if the phone were a thin wall. "Do not give her the satisfaction. Keep that letter. We will need it. If anyone arrives without appointment, do not invite them inside. If they claim authority, ask for identification and call me while they wait." "Clara came," Evelyn added. "She offered help. Said she knows people." "Clara knows whichever side is likely to win," Marcus said, and the weariness in his tone told her it was not a guess. "Be civil. Give her nothing. I will begin drafting a response for when they file. And Evelyn," he paused, choosing a word, "eat. Sleep. Standing is easier on a full stomach." When she hung up, Naomi peered around the doorframe, eyes huge. "Mommy, are we in trouble?" Evelyn knelt and pulled both children into her arms. "No, my loves. People who are afraid of the truth make noise to feel taller. We will mind our own garden. What if they come while we're sleeping?" Nathan asked, the nightmare version of the question every child learns to ask. "Then the house will tell me," she said, and for the first time she believed the old idea that homes hold vigil for the people they keep. They ate stew at the small kitchen table. Evelyn refilled their bowls and took only a little for herself. After dishes, she sat at the desk and opened a plain notebook. She wrote the date at the top, then made a list. Clara arrived, offered help, declined. Car idled at lane, 5:37 p.m., left without approaching. A letter from Eleanor threatening custody, kept envelope. Marcus called, planned to wait, document, and answer only under counsel. At the end she wrote a sentence that surprised her with its steadiness. They mistake me for paper. I am steel under silk. She closed the book and placed it next to Thomas's photograph. His eyes, caught mid-laugh in the frame, seemed to approve of this habit. Accounts kept, facts made ready. The next morning, Clara returned with a tin of cookies tied with twine. I insisted on baking, she trilled. I can take the children to the park while you sort out whatever wives sort out. She tilted her head in a way that had practiced understanding. Thank you, Evelyn said, taking the tin and leaving it closed on the counter. We have plans. Clara's gaze flicked toward the study door. Is this where Thomas kept his papers? Bedrooms are that way, Evelyn said pleasantly, and Clara's smile thinned by a hair. Of course, Clara replied. Well, don't be a stranger. She touched Evelyn's sleeve. Ownership disguised as affection, and left. Through the side window, Evelyn watched Clara pause at the hedgerow and pull out her phone. The back of someone's head in a car across the lane nodded, as if listening. Evelyn lifted the cookies and set them beside the trash. Not in it, not yet, but exiled. She tied a ribbon tighter around the key on her wrist, then locked the study drawer again, this time listening for the small final click that means a thing is protected. When she stepped onto the porch, the morning had sharpened into a bright, cold blue. She inhaled and felt a sliver of steadiness settle in her ribs like a nail in the right place. The house stood behind her. The children shouted in the yard, their voices bright as birds. Come on, she called. We have a fence to walk. They followed the boundary line, small hands grazing bark, boots scuffing frost to dark earth. At the far corner, a footprint not theirs pressed into the mud, not fresh but not old. Evelyn crouched and fitted her palm to it the way a mother checks a fever, measuring what she does not yet understand. She straightened and took both children's hands. We mind our garden, she said again, and the words felt less like a slogan and more like a plan. Morning arrived clear and exacting, the kind of blue that makes frost look like powdered sugar sifted over the fields. Evelyn stood on the porch with the twins tucked into coats, breath rising in puffs. Somewhere in the trees a woodpecker hammered a small, cheerful argument with the world. Shall we begin? She asked, and Naomi saluted with her stuffed rabbit. Nathan pointed his stick, knighted yesterday into a walking staff, toward the path that curved behind the house. They started at the fence line, palms brushing rough bark as they passed. The ground gave softly underfoot. Last year's leaves whispered their opinions and then fell quiet. At the back corner, an oak older than certainty spread its boughs wide. The children tried to measure its trunk with outstretched arms and came up short by miles. This one is a giant, Naomi declared. We should tell it our name so it knows we live here now. They went first. Naomi, then Nathan, then Evelyn, speaking as if to a new neighbor. The tree took the introductions the way trees do, unimpressed but willing to stand witness. A narrow stream chattered over stones just beyond the rise. Nathan knelt, cupped water, and yelped at the cold, laughing as if surprise itself were a game. Evelyn crouched beside him, balancing on the balls of her feet the way she had as a girl. The air smelled clean in a way the city had never managed, even on the kindest days. They followed a deer track along the hedge to an old carriage shed listing like a dignified gentleman who needed a cane. Inside hung tools oiled and waiting, a coil of rope, a pegboard sketched with chalk outlines for wrenches. A metal tag dangled from one nail. Call Alder & Son for repairs. The phone number had faded to a ghost. Is this treasure? Nathan asked, peering into a wooden crate of square nails. It is the beginning of treasure, Evelyn said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Treasure is what you use, not what you hide. They returned to the house by an angle they had not yet walked, seeing familiar windows from a new distance. The front elevation looked both stately and kind, as if someone with a sense of humor had designed it to be impressive up close and welcoming at 10 paces. Inside, Evelyn pushed the screen door and listened. It gave a creak pitched exactly like July. She smiled before she could stop herself. Thomas had promised a sound, the house delivered. Work came next. The the useful kind that keeps hands busy and hearts from overthinking. Evelyn opened windows to trade stale air for a draft that smelled of pine. Naomi and Nathan took turns with the feather duster, chasing sunlit motes through the parlor like out-of-season fireflies. In the kitchen, Evelyn scrubbed counters until wood grain lifted like fingerprints and found a drawer full of neatly wrapped tea towels, each folded as if someone had believed in small order as a way of life. In the study, she claimed a corner of the desk as her command post, laying down a square of paper as a blotter, placing the photograph of Thomas on the right where he seemed to look at her without judgment. She set the manila folder in the top drawer, the deed, the addendum, the passbook, and turned the key until the lock made the small, satisfied click that means a thing is protected. The ribbon holding the key lay warm on the inside of her wrist. She tightened the knot until it sat like a pulse. On a note card she wrote in block letters and taped it discreetly inside the desk. A do not open door without ID. Call Marcus while they wait. Speak little, learn much. Then, because rules are only as strong as habits, she practiced. A knock, her voice steady, the reach for the phone, the breath between. By noon, hunger announced itself. Evelyn sliced apples into fans and cut thick triangles of cheese. They ate on the porch steps, the twins' boots swinging, crumbs attracting a bold little bird who hopped closer with every bite Naomi accidentally dropped. The sun made the frost retreat into the shade, and for a handful of minutes, time felt like something gentle that could be held. Can we sleep here forever? Nathan asked, chin lifted to the sky. Forever is a big word, Evelyn answered. But yes, this is our home now. We will live here as long as we can make it so. She heard the iron under her own promise and felt steadier for it. In the afternoon, a green truck rattled down the lane, bed piled with split oak. An older man at the wheel lifted 2 fingers from the steering wheel. The rural wave that says I know you are new, but not unwelcome. He turned in at the next farm. 10 minutes later, a woman in a canvas jacket walked the fence line between the properties carrying a basket. She did not call out, only placed the basket on the fence post, tipped 2 eggs into the grass by mistake, collected them with a laugh at herself, and continued on. When Evelyn reached the spot, she found a note written in a looping hand. Welcome. I am Mara Alder. Eggs next door if you ever need. The lane puddles in spring. Walk the high edge. M. Alder and Son, Evelyn thought, and tucked the note into her pocket like a key she would use later. She returned to the kitchen to start soup. The house had left behind a cast-iron pot the size of a promise. She sautéed onions and garlic until the air smelled like a memory of better kitchens, added carrots and potatoes, and let the stew consider its future over a slow flame. Naomi set the table with 3 mismatched bowls as if arranging flowers. Nathan folded napkins with the solemnity of ceremony. At dusk, the lane took on that peculiar twilight quality where distances lie. Evelyn stood at a window and watched the dark gather between trees. A car drifted past without slowing. She listened for the engine to linger and felt relief loosen her shoulders when it didn't. Still, she wrote the time in her notebook and underlined it once. Records turn guesses into evidence. She could almost hear Thomas saying it. After dinner, she sat the twins at the table and talked through a game she called What Do We Do If? If someone knocks and says they are a friend, we ask them to wait while Mommy calls Mr. Bell. If someone says they are from the court, we ask for ID and keep the door shut. If Mommy says porch lights, what do you do? Go to the back room and play music loud. They practiced with giggles until the fear started to look like instructions instead of a monster. When bedtime came, she tucked them under quilts that already smelled faintly of them. She read 1 chapter of a book about a brave rabbit and paused when Naomi yawned so wide the yawn made Nathan yawn too. The room quieted. The house settled as houses do, old wood exhaling, pipes shrugging, a loose latch speaking once and then deciding to behave. Evelyn lingered in the hall and then drifted to the study. She lit a small lamp and opened her notebook. Day 1, walked fence. Stream clear. Shed straight enough for another season. Note from Mara Alder. Eggs next door. July lives in the screen door. Children learned the rules and laughed while doing it. Fear, present but negotiable. She closed the cover with the care one uses when putting a baby down. Gentle, decisive, a hand held a second longer than required. On the mantel, Thomas watched from the square of his frame. I am trying, she told him. Outside, a wind moved through the trees like someone's low singing. Evelyn stood with her palms on the cool stone of the hearth and let that sound pass through her. When she finally reached to switch off the lamp, She noticed something she hadn't before. A thin seam of shadow along the back panel of the lower bookcase, a line too precise to be only the way light falls. She crouched, pressed her fingertip to the seam, and felt. Not movement, not yet, just the suggestion of it, like the catch in a throat before a word. "Tomorrow," she said aloud, surprising herself. "Tomorrow we will learn what the walls know." She rose, tied the key ribbon a notch tighter, and went to bed carrying the picture of a hinge in her mind. Evelyn woke with the picture of a hinge in her mind and went straight to the study. Morning made a pale rectangle on the carpet. The house held its breath the way houses do when they know they are about to give up a secret. She knelt by the lower bookcase where last night a seam had looked too precise for chance. Up close she saw it. A hairline gap, a tiny irregularity at the molding's edge. She pressed there. Nothing. She tried again, fingers mapping the wood. A ridge, a faint give, the soft resistance of something meant to move only for someone patient. She slid her hand along the base until she felt a small brass nub no bigger than a shirt button. When she pushed, the backboard released with a sigh and swung inward half an inch. Thomas had built this for hands like hers, hands that keep it a thing until it yields. Inside the shallow cavity lay a leather journal, a string-tied bundle of papers, and a small brass key. Dust traced the outlines of each as if the house had been memorizing their shapes. Evelyn lifted the journal first. The leather was warm from the sun. On the first page, if you are reading this, take a deep breath. It means events unfolded as I feared and as I planned for. Her fingers trembled. She sat cross-legged on the carpet and began to read. Thomas's handwriting, quick but legible, impatient with flourishes, walked her through the last 2 years in a voice he had never used aloud. He wrote names without softening them, dates without rounding, amounts without apology. He recorded how Eleanor had threatened to correct the family story if he didn't fix his mistake in choosing a wife who would not genuflect. He noted the way Edward spoke about money as if it were oxygen and other people's lungs were a design flaw. Edward has begun routing funds through a shell, Northway Holdings, Thomas wrote. It smells of him, impatient, convinced he is invisible. I have photographed what I can. If he pushes after I am gone, follow the wires backward. They untangle with patience. There were pages about meetings with the firm's accountant, about a banker who had said too smoothly, "Family matters are best handled in-house." About the day Thomas visited a notary alone. "I placed the deed in your name, and left a sealed addendum with Bell. If anything happens to that addendum, I have preserved copies here. Do not show them until you must. Power misused thrives in the dark. Let it choke on daylight at the right hour." Halfway through, a name recurred with a ring of unease, Victor Hale. Thomas's note beside it, partner in 2 contracts, outwardly loyal to me, inwardly hungry for Edward's favor. He would sell his mother's ring for a seat at their table. If the ground shifts, watch him. He is the sort who calls betrayal practicality. Evelyn closed her eyes. So there was another wolf in the thicket. At the back of the journal Thomas had sketched the estate with a pencil dull enough to make the lines soft. A few small X's dotted the grounds. One by the big oak at the back corner, one in the attic, one in the cellar behind the wine racks. Beside the sketch he wrote copies. Receipts. Photographs. If Belle is prevented from helping, these will. She set the journal on the desk and untied the string around the papers. Inside were photocopies of wire transfers into Northway Holdings. A draft will with a signature that tried too hard to be Thomas's. Letters from Eleanor, always in that thin expensive paper, telling her son it was time to correct the optics. And 3 small envelope photos dated in neat blue ink, stacks of documents, an accountant's ledger. Victor Hale and Edward shaking hands in a restaurant booth with the kind of smile men wear when they think doors are closed. Anger rose clean in her chest, not the hot kind that scatters judgment, but the cold kind that points. She did not feel smaller reading these. She felt taller, like someone who had been stooping and suddenly remembered her height. "Mommy." Naomi stood at the door with pillow-creased cheeks. "Are you doing secrets?" Evelyn smiled and opened her arms. "I am doing safety," she said, pulling her daughter onto her lap. Nathan appeared behind, hair like a small storm. She kissed their heads and then set them up at the table with crayons and a mission. "Draw me this house the way you see it. Show me where the laughter lives." While they drew, Evelyn took the small brass key from the cavity and tried it in the desk's lower cabinet. It did not fit. She pocketed it and climbed to the attic. Dust motes swam in the slanted light. Under a canvas drop cloth, she found a cedar chest with a keyhole the size of a thumbnail. The brass key turned. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, lay a second set of copies. The notarized addendum, a letter from the notary confirming date and witness, and a hand-sketched family tree with Eleanor's name circled in a way that was not unkind but unsparing. On a folded sheet, Thomas had written, "If they say you forged my signatures, this is the handwriting sample I gave the bank last year. Compare curves, not bravado." Back downstairs, she checked the cellar. The air was cool, a little damp, the way cellars tell you secrets are safe. Behind the wine rack, 3 bricks sat looser than the rest. She lifted them and reached into the pocket they hid. Her fingers found another oilcloth parcel. Inside, a thumb drive, which she set aside for later, and a notebook of contact names. The accountant who had flinched, a teller who had looked away, a junior associate at the firm who had slipped her a business card once with eyes that asked forgiveness. She carried everything to the study and arranged it on the desk in lines that made sense. Journal, copies, photos, deed, addendum. The order calmed her the way clean counters do. She called Marcus. He answered on the second ring. "Tell me you are safe." "Safe," she said. "And armed." She told him about the journal, the X's, the copies, the name Victor Hale. Marcus swore softly, as if careful not to teach the heir new curse words. "Hale's been in Edward's orbit for years. He will present himself as balanced, reasonable, a friend to both sides. He is a hinge they will try to swing the door on. Keep those documents close. Photograph every page. Do not send them anywhere yet. We will scan and file through a channel Eleanor can't taint." "Clara has been by twice," Evelyn added. "Cookies and curiosity. Clara sells information like garden cuttings, cheap and quick." Smile, decline document. "And, Evelyn, this is the part where they stop whispering. Be ready." She glanced toward the lane. "I am." She almost sounded like she believed it. After the call, she made copies with the old all-in-one printer left in the pantry, grateful for the extra toner someone had tucked behind the flower bin. She slipped the duplicates into a new folder labeled in block letters. "If something happens to me, Marcus Bell," and hid it in the attic chest. By late afternoon, the twins had covered a sheet of paper with a map of the house bounded by a large looping heart. "Laughter lives here," Naomi announced, tapping the kitchen. "And here," tapping the porch. "And here," thunking the study with a crayon so close to the journal that Evelyn laughed and moved it back an inch. "Good maps," Evelyn said. "Keep them." She would. Outside, cloud rolled in, turning the field from gold to pewter. Evelyn stood at the window and watched the light thin. Far down the lane, 2 headlights appeared, and then cut out as if the driver had remembered something they did not want noticed. She kept still. A minute passed. Another. A car door shut, distant and soft. She tightened the ribbon on her wrist until the key pressed a small crescent into her skin. She turned off the study lamp and let the house grow quiet around her, the way a person stills before a strain of music they need to hear clearly. The knock, when it came, was measured and polite, the kind of knock that expects to be obeyed. The knock came again, 3 courteous taps, evenly spaced, the rhythm of someone accustomed to being let in. Evelyn kept one hand on the desk and the other on the phone. The twins were in the back room with a stack of picture books and a whispered password. Porch lights. If she said it, they were to play music and stay put. She breathed once, picked up the receiver, and dialed Marcus. He answered on the second ring. "Don't open," he said, as if he had been standing at her shoulder. "Ask for identification through the door. Put me on speaker." Evelyn crossed the hall. "Who is it?" A pleasant baritone. "Edward Westmore and counsel. We're here on a routine matter. We trust this is a good time." Routine, she thought, the way a farmer might call a wolf at the fence wildlife. "Please hold your identification up to the glass." She slid the chain across the lock and raised the shade 2 inches. On the porch stood Edward in an expensive overcoat, the kind that makes ordinary cold look beneath a man. Beside him, a woman in a navy suit held up a leather wallet with a card. Cynthia Rowe, attorney-at-law. 2 more figures lingered at the steps, one with a camera slung across his chest in a gesture meant to be casual. Behind them, at the curve of the lane, Clara's compact car idled, her head bowed as if checking lipstick in a mirror. Evelyn pressed the phone closer to the wood. "Mr. Westmore, Ms. Rowe," she said. "You are on speaker with my counsel." Edward's smile barely moved his mouth. "Of course. We only wish to spare you trouble." He tapped the folder in his hand. "Notice of dispute regarding occupancy, and a proposal that will save everyone a court's time." Slide documents under the door, Evelyn said, and step back 2 paces. A pause, then the paper whisper kicked against the threshold. She stooped, retrieved the top sheet, and read aloud for Marcus. Notice of dispute and demand to vacate, signed by Northway Holdings as interested party. Her heartbeat ticked faster. Northway, Thomas had named it in his journal like a curse. Noted, Marcus said. Photograph each page. Do not acknowledge receipt beyond that sentence. Evelyn lifted her phone and took crisp shots. Acknowledged, she said through the door. We're not monsters, Edward added lightly. If you need time to gather your things, we can allow. What do you think, Cynthia? 72 hours. Mr. Westmore, Evelyn replied, I will not be vacating a property deeded to me and secured by notarized addendum. All further communication should be addressed to my attorney. She could hear her own voice, level, iron-threaded through cotton. The woman in the navy suit leaned, as if scenting leverage. There is also the matter of the children, she said. Given your recent bereavement, Eleanor, Mrs. Westmore, has concerns about your emotional stability. We have a letter from a consulting physician recommending an evaluation. Until that's completed, the family intends to petition for temporary guardianship to provide routine and continuity. Evelyn felt the floor tilt a fraction. What physician? Dr. Livingston, the attorney said smoothly. A highly respected practitioner. Marcus's voice tightened in her ear. Ask for the letter. Slide it under, Evelyn said. Paper moved. She read the letter's heading. A clinic name she didn't recognize, a signature that looked rehearsed. The language was careful. In my opinion, based solely on collateral reports and observed behavior at a public proceeding, a grief-related adjustment disorder may impair decision-making in the short term. Based on what observation? Evelyn asked, keeping her voice curious rather than cornered. The will reading, the attorney said. Your visible distress. I see, Evelyn said. A woman crying when her husband's will is read as evidence of incapacity. Edward's smile thinned. Now. No one is accusing. Enough, Marcus said softly in her ear. Evelyn, here's what you say. Thank you for the papers. My attorney will respond in writing. I won't be discussing my children or my health on the porch. Please leave. Evelyn repeated the sentence. She felt it fit her mouth like a tool made for her hand. Cameras flickered, 2 quiet clicks. The man with the sling pretended to check his settings. Edward shifted to see past the chain as if the door were a stage and he the audience that mattered. That's unfortunate, he said finally, annoyance cooling to contempt. Expect service. He turned as if the conversation bored him, and the law were merely etiquette. The attorney followed, offering a card through the sliver of space. Evelyn took it between 2 fingers the way one would remove a thorn. Ms. Johnson, the attorney added, voice bright. One last reminder. Cooperation reflects well in custody matters. Evelyn closed the shade. Her fingers slipped on the chain for a breath. Then the lock ceded with a faithful thunk. She leaned her forehead against the wood until the air moved again in her lungs. Marcus's voice returned, gentler. You handled that perfectly. Keep those documents flat and clean. I'll file an emergency motion to enjoin any demand to vacate and put Dr. Livingston's letter under a light. I suspect the ink will sweat. Clara is at the lane, Evelyn said. Again. Note the time. Photograph her car from the side window if you can do it without risk. I'll have an investigator pull Livingston's credentials and Northway's filings. And Evelyn, good work. Steel under silk. She set the phone down and exhaled through her hands. In the back room, a record began to play. Naomi's small voice counting the beats the way Evelyn had taught her. Porch lights. The plan was a lullaby now, not a siren. She spread the documents on the desk beside Thomas's journal. The demand to vacate, the guardianship threat dressed as concern, the evaluation recommendation. She photographed each page and wrote in her notebook. Edward plus counsel at 9:12 a.m., demanded vacancy, claimed Northway as interested party. Produced letter from Dr. Livingston capacity, no exam performed, based on observation at will reading. Cameras present, Clara at lane, silver compact. A response, declined to discuss, referred to counsel, documents photographed. At the edge of the property, Clara's car crept forward, paused, and then rolled on like a gossip pretending she'd only ever been out for a drive. 5 minutes later, a text buzzed from an unknown number. Thinking of you. If you need a friendly witness in town, I know people. See. Evelyn blocked the sender and wrote that down too. The doorbell chimed at noon. Not a knock this time. A woman stood on the porch with a clipboard and a tote printed with the county seal. "Ms. Johnson? I'm with Family Services," she announced, already craning to see over Evelyn's shoulder. "We've had a concern about the children's welfare and would like to do a quick check-in." Evelyn felt anger ring like a struck glass, pure and resonant. "Identification, please," she said, holding the chain. The woman presented a badge. It looked real enough. That was the danger. "We can schedule a visit through council," Evelyn said, channeling Marcus. "Today isn't possible." "It will only take a minute," the woman pressed, foot shifting forward, an inch too familiar. "If you refuse, I'll have to note non-cooperation." The word refuse was weighted like bait. Evelyn's mind moved fast. A real social worker would be prepared to schedule. The county number on the card was blurred at the edge, like a counterfeit printed in haste. She lifted her phone with deliberate calm. "Smile for a photo of your badge," she said. "I'll have my attorney call the main office to confirm." The woman hesitated, then pivoted to reassurance. "No need to make a fuss." "Then we'll make an appointment," Evelyn replied. "Have a good day." She closed the door before the woman could plant another sentence inside. Marcus answered on the first ring. "They pushed a fake social worker?" "Clipboard tote impatience," Evelyn said. "Badge with a number that looks like it was tired of being a number. Good instincts. I'll alert the real office and request they route any inquiry through me. Forward the photo." When the house was quiet again, Evelyn loosened her jaw and rolled her shoulders as if shaking rain from a coat. She heated soup and set bowls in front of the twins, hands steady. "Was that a scary person?" Nathan asked, mouth close to the spoon. "A person who forgot her manners," Evelyn said, and the answer was true enough for now. "What do we do when people forget their manners?" "We use ours," Naomi said, pleased to know the line. After lunch, Evelyn walked the fence. She pictured the property as a circle drawn not just in earth but in will. At the back corner, a trail cut through the low brush toward the alder's field. She saw a figure there, Mara, lifting a hand in a steady, uncurious wave that meant, "I saw but I won't shout." Evelyn lifted hers in reply and felt something granular and irreplaceable knit itself in her chest. A first stitch of neighbor. By evening, Marcus texted, filed motion to enjoin eviction, prepped response on guardianship threat, requested verification from county. Also, Livingston's clinic connects to Northway. Surprise. Evelyn read the message twice, then 3 times. She set her palm flat on Thomas's journal. "You were right," she told the quiet room. "Wolves in shepherd's coats." She wrote one last line in the notebook before bed. They tried the door. It held. By noon the sky had collapsed into rain, drumming on the porch roof in a hard, unmusical rhythm. The postman left the bundle at the gate to keep his hat dry. Evelyn carried it in under one arm, the weight of soaked envelopes heavier than paper ought to be. She laid everything on the kitchen table and toweled the surface dry. The twins were turning shoeboxes into boats on the floor, humming to themselves, unbothered by weather. Evelyn reached for the top envelope with the queasy steadiness of someone picking up a hot pan. Final notice, apartment possession executed. A letter from their old landlord. The unit reclaimed. Remaining boxes to be discarded in 7 days if uncollected. Fees due. Utility collection action. A different company, a different tone. Amounts, late charges, the threat of credit reports like a shadow on a wall. She opened a thicker envelope with a court seal and felt the room shift half a degree. Emergency petition for temporary guardianship. Westmore, Eleanor, v. Johnson Westmore, Evelyn. Hearing scheduled in 10 days. Attached, an affidavit from Dr. Livingston about functional impairment during bereavement. Repeating the sentence about observed behavior at a public proceeding. Her stomach went cold. She set the papers down, fingertips pressed to the table to stop their shaking. The rain found a new tempo in the gutters. It sounded like someone drumming their fingers, impatient for her to fail. She dialed Marcus. Voicemail. She left a message she tried to make factual, dates, documents, a summary of the disaster's shape. When she hung up, the phone vibrated. Unknown number, thinking of you. If you need a friendly face at court, I can sit behind you for moral support. See. She blocked it without answering and wrote the time in her notebook. When the kettle clicked, she realized she had filled it at some forgotten interval. She poured tea and did not drink it. The steam fogged her glasses. Tears joined it without asking permission. She wiped them away with the edge of her sleeve and kept opening envelopes because sometimes the only way out of a pile is through it. A knock broke the rain's monopoly. She checked the peephole before opening the door the width of the chain. Mara Alder stood on the porch in a wax jacket, rain pooling on the brim of her hat. She held a basket under one arm the way country people hold hospitality. As something you do, not something you announce. Brought you rolls, Mara said. And eggs. The lane is a mess. Thank you, Evelyn said, surprised into softness. Mara's eyes did a small, precise sweep of Evelyn's face the way nurses do to make sure a story matches a body. Heard cars in your drive yesterday, she added, neutral as weather. Folks with paper don't always bring sense with them. They brought a petition, Evelyn managed. For my children. Mara's mouth flattened, not at Evelyn. I'll walk your fence more often, she said. Good for the legs. She tipped her hat. Shout if you need a witness to what doesn't happen here. And she was gone, her boots finding the side of the lane that did not sink. Evelyn set the basket down and finally let herself sit. The guardianship packet sat like a third presence at the table. She read every line until the language lost its threat and became only ink. She took photos of each page, filed them by date, and wrote a heading on a blank sheet, response fax. Beneath it she listed, no clinical evaluation performed, observation at while reading, children attending regular meals/sleep, routines established, neighbor contact M, Alder available, photographs of children's room, kitchen, garden. She added, affidavit from pediatrician, letter from teacher, schedule of daily care. The list steadied her. Lists do what mercy sometimes cannot. The phone rang. Marcus. I'm here, he said. I was in front of a judge. I couldn't step out. Tell me. She did. She heard him breathe slowly once on the other end. Good. We expected the guardianship motion. I'm filing our injunction on the vacate demand today and a motion to strike Livingston's affidavit tomorrow. We've traced his clinic, shell company fed by Northway. We'll expose the connection and ask the court to give Dr. Livingston's opinion the weight it deserves. None. What if they send real social workers? Then we welcome them with documentation and courtesy. I've already notified the county to route all contact through me. We'll also schedule you with a licensed therapist for a standard grief assessment. Our clinician, not their stooge. We don't hide. We show the truth with clean hands. Evelyn closed her eyes and nodded, though he could not see it. The apartment are boxes. I'll have a junior go collect them and store them in our records room for now, Marcus said, as if moving the remnants of a life were as simple as moving a file. We'll cover the fee and add it to costs for recovery later. The relief that followed was so sharp it hurt. Thank you, she whispered. He lowered his voice, as if a secret could grow stronger if borne quietly. And Evelyn, tonight I'll come by with copies of something you will want to see. Call logs, bank transfers, a sealed addendum I pried out of storage. The pattern is forming. Victor Hale's name appears right where Thomas marked it. We will be ready for them. After the call, the house felt less like a boat and more like a dock. Evelyn stood, washed her face, and put a pot on for soup because children should not eat fear for lunch. She buttered Mara's rolls and slid one onto each plate. When Naomi asked, "Is the rain loud because it's angry?" Evelyn said, "It's loud because it fell a long way. That's all," and was surprised by the wisdom of the sentence. The twins ate, then drifted to the living room to build a fort from blankets and 2 chairs that would never recover their former dignity. Their voices rose in the liturgy of play. Passwords, dragon alarms, a whispered debate about whether rabbits or lions make better guards. Evelyn returned to the table. The guardianship papers stared back, bleak and official. She read them again until their assumption, that grief equals incompetence, made her angry enough to move. She took photos of the children's room. 2 small beds made, books on the shelf, clean clothes folded. She photographed the kitchen, bowls drying, fruit in a bowl, the soup pot steaming like proof. She wrote to the pediatrician's office requesting a letter confirming the twins' health and her attendance at appointments. She texted the teacher from their old school for a brief note about Evelyn's presence at pickups and conferences. Each reply came back with the small kindness of exclamation points. When the house slowed in the late afternoon rain, weariness slid its hand onto her shoulder. She sat with her head bowed and let tears fall. Not the frantic kind. The acknowledging kind. The ones that say, "Yes, this is hard. Yes, you are doing it anyway." Tiny feet padded across the rug. Nathan climbed into her lap without preface and tucked his head under her chin the way he had when he was younger. "Mommy," he said into the fabric of her sweater, "we don't need a big house or lots of money. We just need you. You're the warm part." Naomi pressed in from the other side, offering the stuffed rabbit like a treaty. And Mr. Bunn. He says you're brave. Evelyn laughed through tears and kissed the tops of their heads. Then Mr. Bunn is a wise rabbit, she said. I will be brave. She felt the truth of it settle. Not the loud kind of brave. The durable kind. They stayed like that until the rain softened to a steady whisper. After she tucked them into bed, she opened Thomas's journal and laid her palm over the page where he had written "You are stronger than you believe." She went to the Bible on the shelf and slid her fingers under Psalm 23 until she felt the edge of the $20 bill. She did not pull it out. It was enough to touch proof that an insult can be turned into a promise. She made a go bag. Copies of the deed, the addendum, the journal pages flagged, photographs printed, a list of the children's routines. She placed it by the door where she kept the porch lights record and the twins' rain boots. Then she wrote the day's final entry in her notebook. A guardianship petition served, hearing in 10 days. A Livingston affidavit connected to Northway. A evidence of children's care documented. Neighbor willing to witness, M. Alder. Marcus retrieving boxes, bringing new documents tonight. She set down the pen. Outside, tires hissed on wet gravel, then quieted. Her phone buzzed. Marcus, running late but close. Keep the porch light on. This is the turning point. Evelyn stood and switched on the lamp by the door, its glow spilling onto the steps like a small sun. Her reflection in the window's dark pane looked like a woman she recognized again. The porch light spilled a soft circle on the steps when Marcus Bell climbed them at last, rain silvering the shoulders of his coat. He carried a leather briefcase as if it contained something alive. Inside, the house breathed in that nighttime way, pipes ticking, Oldwood remembering its shape. The twins were asleep. The record with the porch lights song sat ready on the console like a talisman. Evelyn opened the door on the chain, confirmed his face, then let him in. You're late, she said, but her voice had relief threaded through it. I brought the reasons, Marcus answered. He set the briefcase on the desk, wiped his hands on a handkerchief as if to make sure no rain clung to what he was about to touch, and clicked the latches. He unfolded the night into careful stacks. One sealed addendum, original on file, certified copy in hand. Dated 6 months before Thomas died, Marcus said. Notarized, stamp verified, witness signature on record. It explicitly places this estate and 2 accounts under your sole authority. 2 bank and wire records. Transfers from Westmore & Sons to Northway Holdings, then to Edward's personal account. We match dates to board minutes. There's no business purpose that survives the light. 3 Victor Hale Trail. Retainer agreements, 2 side letters, and an email where Hale writes Edward. Once we quiet her claims, we can complete the asset roll-up. Marcus tapped the page. Hale is the hinge, just as Thomas wrote. 4. Livingston Clinic Corporate Registry. The consulting physician who wrote that capacity letter? His clinic's landlord is a Northway shell. We have the filings. That affidavit's worth less than the paper that carries it. 5. Notary affidavit and handwriting samples. Thomas filed a handwriting specimen at his bank last year. We'll ask the court to compare it to the so-called true will they paraded. The bravado in that signature is all Edward. Evelyn stood very still, arms folded tight under her ribs. Each stack added weight to the desk and took weight off her chest. I stole none of this, Marcus added, anticipating the fear behind her eyes. I used my keys while I still possessed them and copied what the law allows. What I couldn't copy, I subpoena tomorrow. What happens now? Evelyn asked. The question did not tremble. Now we make a record the court cannot ignore, he said. He slid a legal pad across. Plan was written at the top in block letters. Tonight we photograph and index everything. Tomorrow morning I file 3 things. A. A motion to enjoin any vacate demand. B. A motion to strike Livingston's affidavit as unreliable and conflicted. C. A notice of intent to seek sanctions for abuse of process. And Hale? A subpoena for documents and a deposition notice, Marcus said. Hale will try to play the reasonable man. We will bring him emails until his reason buckles. They worked shoulder to shoulder. Evelyn labeled folders, slid pages into sleeves, and learned the rhythm of proof. The way order itself can feel like oxygen. Marcus dictated log lines. She wrote them clean. Addendum, cert. Copy date, seal, witness, page count. A deed, recording number, page image. A Northway transfers, dates, amounts, endpoints. Hale correspondence, sender, recipient, subject, plain language summary. A Livingston link, registry chain, landlord entity, tied to Northway. When the printer jammed, Evelyn breathed, unlatched the tray, coaxed the mangled paper free without tearing, and fed it back through. "You've done this before," Marcus said, almost smiling. "Life has many jammed things," she replied. "You learn not to panic." He assembled a binder with color tabs, blue for title documents, red for fraud, green for custody-related matters, yellow for correspondence. He handed it to her the way some men hand a sword. A small sound at the doorway. Naomi stood there with a thirst and a question. "Mr. Bell," she whispered. Marcus softened. "Hello, Miss Naomi," he said. "Back to bed after water, General's orders." He glanced to Evelyn for permission before adding, "Your mommy is doing brave work." Naomi nodded solemnly. "We know. She's steel under silk." She took her water and patted away. Marcus's mouth pulled into something like pride. "Out of the mouths of babes," he murmured. They returned to the desk. "I want you to have redundancies," he said. "One binder here, a digital set on an encrypted drive, and one off-site copy." He slid a thumb drive across. "This is for your pocket if you must run. The second goes with me." Evelyn tucked the drive into the small inside pocket of her coat, then paused. "If something happens to me." He shook his head. "We plan for victory, not melodrama. But you'll still write a cover sheet that says if something happens to me, deliver to Judge Hart, Chambers, with this note from Marcus Bell." He tore a sheet from his pad and wrote the message in his own hand, signed it, and dated it. "I can't believe I'm asking you to keep this in your house," he added. "But this is where you are safest, because you are visible." "Visible? Villains prefer shadows," Marcus said. "You have neighbors now." Mara Alder's note wasn't a courtesy. It was a line in the ledger. "If anyone tries a visit again, text her and me. We will put more eyes on the lane than Eleanor enjoys." Evelyn exhaled. The line between fear and readiness thinned until she could step over it. "About court," Marcus continued. "We won't wait 10 days like lambs. I'll request an accelerated hearing for the injunction. You'll meet our clinician tomorrow for a grief assessment, simple, standard. You will not present strength as lack of love. You will present functioning as love's form." "That I can do," she said. He closed the briefcase, emptied now except for his own courage. "One more thing." He placed a small envelope on the desk. "The notary from Thomas's addendum, Ms. Patel, has agreed to swear an affidavit first thing. She remembers Thomas, remembers his insistence that your name be spelled with both surnames. Details win cases." Evelyn's eyes stung. Not from grief, not exactly. From the accumulating fact that love could be made into paper strong enough to hold. They stood on the porch a moment before he left. The rain had softened to a fine mist. Across the field, a light winked in the alder's window and then went out, as if someone had checked and decided all was well for tonight. "Sleep if you can," Marcus said. "If not, stack until your mind quiets. I'll text when the motions are filed." "Thank you," she said, and meant the bigger thing. After his taillights slipped down the lane, Evelyn sat at the desk and flipped through the tabs. Blue, red, green, yellow. Her fingers learned the order the way a pianist learns keys. She wrote one line in her notebook before blowing out the lamp. "We have moved from begging to building." In the bedroom, she paused at the twins' doorway. They slept tangled, a tangle she would defend with everything she now held. She lay down without undressing and left the binder on the chair within reach. Outside, the rain stitched itself into the dark like mending. The courthouse looked like it had been built to outlast mistakes. Granite steps, columns that turned weather into a rumor. Evelyn stood at the bottom with her binder against her chest and watched breath cloud in the morning air. Marcus touched her elbow. "We walk in with truth," he said, as if reminding her which shoes she'd put on. Mara Alder met them on the steps with 2 paper cups. "Tea," she said. "My mother swore by it before any kind of reckoning." She squeezed Evelyn's hand, then nodded toward the entrance. "I'll sit with the children in the hallway if you like. We'll count the tiles and tell rabbit jokes until this is done." Evelyn kissed Naomi and Nathan and tucked a lock of hair behind each ear. "General's orders," she told them. "You hold the fort." They saluted with solemn joy. Mara shepherded them inside, steady as a fence post. In courtroom 3, wood and quiet dominated. Judge Hart, silver hair, level eyes, took the bench and called the docket. Injunction against eviction. Motion to strike the physician's affidavit. Guardianship petition. On the other side of the aisle, Eleanor Westmore sat with her purse clasped like a verdict. Edward adjusted his cufflinks. Their attorney, Cynthia Rowe, arranged her notes as if tidiness could make a case true. Behind them, Victor Hale slid into the second row with a face practiced at neutrality. Clara took a seat by the aisle, pearls small and obedient. Judge Hart began without flourish. Counsel, I expect clarity. Ms. Rowe, you brought the demand to vacate and the guardianship petition. Mr. Bell, you've moved to enjoin the former and strike the supporting affidavit for the latter. Let's hear you, Mr. Bell. Marcus stood unhurried. Your Honor, we ask for immediate injunction against any attempt to dispossess Mrs. Johnson Westmore from property deeded to her and corroborated by a notarized addendum filed 6 months before Mr. Westmore's death. He lifted a tabbed packet. Certified copy of the addendum, notary affidavit from Ms. Patel, and the recorded deed. We also submit evidence that the so-called true will proffered by the family is inconsistent with Mr. Westmore's bank-filed handwriting specimen. He handed the binder's blue section to the clerk. Paper traveled. Judge Hart scanned, expression unreadable but attentive. Ms. Rowe. Rowe rose smoothly. Your Honor, we believe the addendum was executed under duress. The decedent was ill, his judgment was impaired. Moreover, my clients have serious concerns about Mrs. Johnson Westmore's current capacity to provide a stable environment for the children. We filed an affidavit from a consulting physician recommending evaluation. Without examination, Marcus said, still standing. Based on observing a grieving widow at a will reading and collateral reports from interested parties. We move to strike that affidavit as unreliable and conflicted. He slid forward another tab. Corporate registry tying Dr. Livingston's clinic to a Northway Holdings shell. Northway, in turn, receives funds siphoned from the family business. Judge Hart's eyebrows moved a millimeter. You have filings? Yes, Your Honor. Exhibits G through K. Rowe tried for lightness and missed. Any property manager can rent to a clinic. It doesn't establish bias. It establishes a pipeline, Marcus answered. And we will prove it if the court wishes to hear our witness from the registry office. Judge Hart held up a hand, eyes returning to the addendum. Ms. Patel's affidavit is detailed, she said. Notarization protocol, identification, date and time. Ms. Rowe, do you have evidence contradicting the notary? Rowe pivoted. We have a witness to Mrs. Johnson Westmore's recent instability. Clara Whitmore, second cousin by marriage, can testify to erratic behavior that raises concern for the children. Clara stood, smoothing her skirt. On the stand she arranged her face into compassion. I visited to offer help, she said, voice tuned to a note between pity and alarm. She was jumpy, secretive, and the children seemed unsure. I fear the isolation has been detrimental. Marcus approached slowly. Ms. Whitmore, you say you visited to offer help. Did you send any messages to Mr. Edward Westmore about those visits? Clara blinked. I may have updated him. We are family. Updated him, Marcus repeated. He held up a printed text thread. Is this your phone number? Clara flushed. I don't recall. Allow me. Marcus read, she's here. Children too. Papers in a folder. And later, find out when she plans to file anything. Do not be obvious. That reply came from a number registered to Mr. Westmore. Did you receive any payment from Northway Holdings? No, Clara said too quickly. Marcus laid another page on the rail. Bank transfer, Ms. Whitmore. $2,500. Memo line, consultancy. Date corresponds with your second cookie visit. He tilted his head. Would you like to revise your testimony about your motive? Clara's mouth opened and closed without a word. Judge Hart's pen made a small note. You may step down, the judge said coolly. Ms. Rowe, choose your witnesses with more care. Rowe's posture stiffened. Your Honor, regardless, the physician's assessment is not an assessment, Judge Hart cut in. It is a letter written without examination by a doctor whose clinic's landlord is tied to a party with a financial stake in this litigation. The affidavit is stricken. A rustle moved through the gallery. Eleanor's jaw tensed. Edward's pen stopped twirling. Marcus did not smile. He turned a red tab. Finally, Your Honor, to the matter of Northway. We submit wire records showing funds moved from Westmore and Sons into Northway and then to Mr. Edward Westmore. We also submit correspondence from one Victor Hale referencing an asset roll-up upon quieting my client's claims. Rowe objected on reflex. Email out of context. Then let's invite context, Marcus said and faced the second row. Mr. Hale, you've been subpoenaed. Please take the stand. Victor Hale approached with the cautious confidence of men who spend a lot of time on panels. He swore in and settled. Mr. Hale, Marcus began, polite as a scalpel. You are a business associate of the Westmores? I have advised the family on strategic matters, Hale said. His voice had the varnish of reason. Did you write this email to Mr. Edward Westmore? Marcus held up the printout. Hale adjusted his tie. In part, it referred to consolidating assets to manage liquidity after a death. Standard. Standard to quiet her claims? Marcus asked. What does that phrase mean to you? Hale spread his hands. To resolve disputes efficiently. With forged documents? Marcus's tone did not rise. He placed the handwriting specimen beside the true will. You are an intelligent man, Mr. Hale. Tell the court whether these signatures match. Hale hesitated. On the bench, Judge Hart leaned slightly forward. Silence made a vacuum that truth could rush into if allowed. No, Hale said finally. A small word, heavier than it looked. They do not. Rowe objected again. He is not a handwriting expert. He is the architect, Marcus said. And even architects know when lines don't align. He turned back to Hale. Did you advise Mr. Westmore, Edward, on strategies for preventing Mrs. Johnson Westmore from taking possession of this estate? Hale stared at a point somewhere above the clerk's lamp. I advised on communications, he said. Families act rashly in grief. Did you coordinate with Dr. Livingston's clinic? Hale's eyes flickered. I was aware of concerns. Marcus slid forward the registry filings. The clinic's landlord is a Northway entity. Northway receives your consulting invoices. Would you like to try again? A beat. 2. Hale exhaled. I made introductions, he said softer. Edward believed an evaluation would demonstrate instability. I did not inquire further. Inquiries are the difference between advice and conspiracy, Judge Hart said. Her voice carried without volume. You may step down. Rowe tried once more. Your Honor, the family's primary concern is the children's welfare, which is not furthered by forged documents, conflicted affidavits, and paid gossip, Judge Hart replied. She looked toward Evelyn for the first time. Mrs. Johnson Westmore, do your children attend school? Do they have a physician? Are they housed, clothed, and fed? Yes, Your Honor, Evelyn said, standing. I brought documentation. She lifted the green tab. Pediatrician letter, teacher note, photographs of the children's room and kitchen. There is soup on the stove most nights, she added before she could stop herself. A few smiles flickered at the edges of the room. Judge Hart nodded once, as if measuring humanity as part of the record. She set her pen down. Here is the court's ruling. The motion to enjoin any demand to vacate is granted. The physician's affidavit is stricken as unreliable and conflicted. The guardianship petition is denied for lack of evidence of unfitness. Further, the court issues a temporary protective order enjoining parties from harassing contact at the residence. Counsel will confer on a schedule for accounting and discovery regarding Northway and related entities. Sanctions are reserved pending that accounting. The gavel sounded like a door closing firmly against a storm. Eleanor's mouth tightened to a thin line. Edward went pale, then red. Clara stared hard at her lap. Victor Hale looked smaller than when he'd walked in. Marcus exhaled for the first time in an hour. He squeezed Evelyn's shoulder. You stood, he whispered. That matters. In the hallway, Naomi and Nathan ran into her arms at once. Mara handed over the empty teacup and a smile like a benediction. Well, we're going home, Evelyn said. Her voice did not shake. To our home. They stepped back into winter light that felt, for the first time, like a friend. Snow dusted the stone steps the morning after court, a thin lace that melted where the porch light had kept vigil. Evelyn stood with the door open to the cold, letting the air sweep yesterday out of the rooms. The house felt different, as if its beams had relaxed by a fraction, relieved of holding so much breath. On the kitchen table, the binder lay open to the blue tab, deed and addendum, like a book that knows the ending now. Beside it sat 2 mugs of cocoa the twins had abandoned in their rush to the yard. Through the window, she watched Naomi and Nathan run across the brittle grass, their coats flashing bright as birds. They were inventing a game whose only rule, from the sound of it, was joy. Marcus's text arrived at 8:02, protective order filed. Sheriff served notice to the Westmores. Discovery schedule set. I'll bring copies at noon. A second message followed. Hale's counsel has called twice. He'd like to be reasonable now. Evelyn smiled without humor. Reason had been available to certain men for a long time. She closed the binder gently and slid it into the desk. Then she took the Bible from the shelf and opened to Psalm 23 until her fingers brushed the edge of the $20 bill. She lifted it out and held it to the light. It was still crisp, still insult and emblem. She did not frame it or burn it. She folded it once and wrote on the margin with a tiny hand, "Not my worth," and tucked it into a kitchen jar with 3 coins and a paper clip. "Let it be seed, not shrine." "Mommy," Naomi called from the yard, breath making small clouds, "can we plant the tree today?" "Yes," Evelyn answered, and the word felt like a door swinging wide. They chose the place together, near the porch where summer would throw shade on steps and stories. The ground, cold but willing, yielded under the shovel. Nathan declared each clump of earth a dragon defeated. Naomi patted the hole's edge smooth with her mittened hands as if comforting it for the change. Mara Alder appeared at the fence line with a burlap-wrapped sapling on her shoulder and a coil of twine hooked to her belt. "If one is going in," she said, "it ought to be an oak. They keep secrets and absolutes." She set the tree down with a practiced gentleness. "Alder and Son owed you a proper welcome." Evelyn blinked against the sudden sting in her eyes. "Thank you," she managed. Mara crouched, tested the depth with a gardener's eye, and nodded. "Good hole. The rest is patience." She steadied the trunk while Evelyn and the twins filled soil around the roots, their breath puffing in small laboring clouds. When the sapling stood straight, Mara tied it to a stake with the right amount of give. "Trees must learn wind," she said, "but not all at once." Naomi produced the stuffed rabbit and pressed its nose to the bark. "This is Daddy's tree," she whispered. "You will grow with us." Nathan, after serious deliberation, slipped a marble into the soil, a blue one that caught light in a way he liked. "For luck," he declared. Evelyn laid her palm on the thin trunk. "For memory," she added. "And for what comes next." They stood back. The sapling looked modest, almost shy. But under the quiet, roots had already begun their patient work. Inside, the house hummed with useful noises, soup thinking on the stove, the washing machine catching its rhythm. Evelyn sorted the last of the boxes Marcus's Jr. had rescued from the apartment. The twins' drawings, a winter scarf that still held Thomas's cologne, a jar of screws and picture hooks that would one day hold frames in confident places. She found a photograph from their first spring together. Thomas grinning, sleeves rolled, a smear of flour on his cheek from a failed attempt at bread. She set it on the mantel beside the newer one and did not apologize for needing both. At noon, Marcus arrived with a sheaf of stamped copies and a grin he didn't try to hide. "Empress of Evidence," he said in greeting. "How does sovereignty feel?" "Grounded," she answered, and meant the pun. They sat at the table while he reviewed next steps. A forensic accountant assigned to Northway, subpoenas to Hale and the bank, a contempt hearing if Eleanor ignored the no-contact order, options to petition for an accounting of estate assets siphoned before death. "This is the slow part," Marcus warned. "Truth is nimble in the heart and deliberate on paper." "I can be both," Evelyn said. He studied her face a moment, then nodded. "You already are." In the afternoon, a van from the school district pulled into the lane. The principal herself stepped out with a packet. "We'd like to enroll Naomi and Nathan next week," she said, eyes kind and efficient. Mrs. Alder called. She said, "These are our people now." "That's usually enough." She winked. "But I brought forms anyway." Evelyn filled them out at the kitchen counter, while the twins demonstrated the exact dimensions of their fort for the principal, who listened gravely and pronounced it architecturally sound. When the van left, Naomi twirled in the yard until dizziness made her fall laughing into the snow-dusted grass. Nathan practiced the bus wave he had seen older children use, casual, practiced, like belonging. Toward evening, a courier delivered a thick envelope from Rowe and Associates. Marcus opened it with a penknife and skimmed, jaw tightening. "They're offering a settlement," he said, incredulous. "A quiet title in your favor in exchange for mutual non-disparagement and an agreement not to pursue sanctions." Evelyn thought of Edward's polished contempt, Eleanor's arsenic courtesy, Clara's tidy lies, Victor Hale's careful omissions. She thought of late-night tears and early-morning lists, of soup and rabbits and a neighbor's unasked-for eggs. She set the envelope aside without opening the offer itself. "I don't need their apology disguised as a bargain," she said. "I need the record to be true." Marcus smiled like a man who has been allowed to do his best work. "Then we decline and proceed." Dusk gathered. Evelyn lit the lamp in the study and wrote in her notebook. "Protective order served. No cars in lane today. Sapling planted. Oak gift from Alder and Son. Marble for luck. School forms completed. Start date next week. Settlement offer received. Declined." Soup recipe improved by accident. Note, more garlic. She added a line that surprised her with its calm. I am not a story they tell. I am the author of the record. The twins fell asleep early, worn out by planting and plans. Evelyn tucked quilts higher on their shoulders and stood a moment, watching the slow rise and fall that had become her metronome. In the study, she turned the frame of Thomas's photograph so it caught the lamplight. I kept it, she said softly. What you saved. What you believed. She touched the oak stake ribbon tied to her wrist and listened to the house hold the words. Outside, a fox crossed the field with the quiet confidence of creatures that have never had to ask permission. The oak sapling moved only slightly in the breeze, learning wind just enough. Before bed, Evelyn carried the cocoa mugs to the sink and rinsed them clean. She set the binder on the desk and closed the cover. Then she took a small index card and wrote a sentence for the jar where the 20 rested. Emergency fund begins here. Dignity first. She slid a second card into the journal at Thomas's line. You are stronger than you believe, and added beneath it, in her own hand, I do now. My friend, I hope you are doing well. Thank you for walking with Evelyn to the very last page. What lesson do you take from her journey? Tell me in the comments, and let me know where you are watching from. This story reminds us that dignity is worth more than gold, that truth takes time but does not tire, and that love, quiet, sturdy, insistent, outlives every lie. If someone you know is facing humiliation or a stacked deck, send them this story tonight. It might be the courage they need to plant their own tree. If this touched you, remember to subscribe for more true-to-life tales of courage, justice, and hope. Until the next story, keep your heart gentle and your will unbroken.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed it, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and more intriguing than you can ever imagine.